Hello friends and welcome. Thank you so much for stopping by. I'm really glad you're here. My name is Becca and this channel is all about my love for spinning, knitting, weaving, crocheting, sewing, all the fiber things. I invite you to grab whatever project you have on the go and join me. Let's make some stuff. I'll start this video with what I'm wearing. This is a brand new top that I sewed by hand. This is 100% cotton fabric from Joann, and the pattern is New Look number 6407. This is view D with the puff sleeves and the little ties. This is the second one I've made from this pattern. I also made view E with the cap sleeves and the stand-up collar. I really love this pattern because it has multiple sleeve and collar options for a pretty basic blouse. So you can really easily build up a wardrobe of things that look very different, but only have to do the fitting once rather than on multiple patterns. So again, this is New Look 6407, brand new shirt. And for those of you following along, I completed my third and final Attune shawl from Andrea Mowry of Drea Renee Knits. This is was the summer spin and knit along, so this is two different kinds of wool. The dark is a breed called Black Welsh Mountain, and the reds and yellow variegated and purple is a wool that was dyed, hand dyed by Serenity Dyeworks. Really beautiful. I'm going to keep this one for myself. I also am going to keep the second one that I made, which is this one in turquoise merino Zwartbles blend. So it has some black from the Zwartbles mixed in, so it has a really nice depth of texture in the color, and then also this silver merino with some stellina sparkles. So very different in both of these shawls. I did make a third one, but I don't have that to show you because I gave it as a gift to a friend for their wedding. But I will link to the previous videos where I show that one as well. This pattern is a lot of fun to knit. It has a lot of great texture. It was designed for hand spun yarn. So if you're looking for a project to knit with your hand spun yarn, I would definitely recommend this one. Today I wanted to talk about knitting styles. There are lots of different ways that we can make the stitches for knitting. And they're called by lots of different names. Some people call it right-handed versus left-handed. Some people call it English versus Continental. Throwing versus picking. There's lots of different names, but essentially they're all referring to which hand you use when you're holding on to the working yarn, whether you're holding it in the hand that is making the new stitches or the hand that is holding the needle that has the stitches that you already have them made. So today I wanted to talk about how I usually do my knitting and maybe explore some of the different benefits and differences between the two different techniques. There are some other techniques that use different additional pieces of hardware, so a knitting belt or a knitting pin or various things. I'm not going to go into those today, although they are very cool, so if you have are interested in exploring that, let me know in the comments. But today I'm going to focus on really right-handed versus left-handed. Which one do I use and why? So I expect that most people knit in the style that they learned. And that was definitely true for me for a long time. I learned initially how to knit holding the working yarn in my right hand. I'm a right-handed knitter, right-handed in general, and so that was the technique that I learned. Supposedly my mother taught me how to knit when I was a child, but apparently I was not paying very close attention because I didn't know how to knit until I bought a how to knit booklet and kit, which I think was a Lion brand product that came with a pair of needles, a skein of yarn, and a booklet that had instructions, very detailed instructions for how to knit with lots of helpful pictures and several different projects. The first one is this one, a basic scarf, stockinette scarf in a nice chunky bulky weight yarn. So it's knit on one side, purl on the other, and you get to practice with this. This is a simple project. I know a lot of you probably started with a very simple rectangular project with your knitting as well. But they still look nice, and I actually still wear this scarf occasionally. But that was how I learned how to knit right-handed. And essentially with right-handed knitting, you are holding both of the needles. Your stitches that exist are on the left-hand needle. The new stitches that you're making go on the right-handed needle. You hold the yarn with the working yarn with your right hand, and you are throwing the yarn around to make the stitch. So you insert the needle into the stitch, throw the yarn around, pull that loop through, and then pull it off to make the new stitch. So it works great. There's nothing wrong with right-handed knitting, but I had heard after, and I did this for several years, happily knitting away with my right-handed knitting, and I got very skilled with it and fairly quick. But I had heard people talking about how continental knitting or left-handed knitting or picking was so much faster than knitting with your right hand. And so I decided that I wanted to learn that technique. So now we flash forward a few years, and I had become very comfortable with my right-handed knitting technique. And at the time, there was a television program called Knit and Crochet Today, which you might have heard of. This was many years ago now. That was on one of the free television channels, PBS or something. So this television program had all sorts of people demonstrating different knitting techniques, and some people used the right-handed style, some people used the left-handed style. This show would be on a couple of times a week, maybe once a day. I can't remember for sure how frequently it was. But one weekend they were doing a marathon of all the episodes back to back, and I thought, this is my chance. I'm really going to dig in and watch very carefully how they're doing this left-handed technique, and I'm going to learn how to do this. So I would watch very carefully, try it out a little bit, make lots of mistakes, watch some more, until I eventually got the hang of it, and I decided I need to do a full project with this new technique just so I can solidify it in my brain. And so I did. This is the scarf that I made with that technique. My very first left-handed knitting project. It is Lion brand yarn. I think it's called Wool Ease in these various different colors. And then I have some duplicate stitch black squares every now and again just to add a little extra interest. It's just a basic stockinette, and so I sewed this velvet fabric onto the backs to hide all the backside. Made some nice lovely tassels, and again, this is a scarf that I wear still. It did take me a while to figure out this left-handed knitting. It certainly was not as fast at first as doing the right-handed knitting that I had been skilled with. It took me a while to figure out the way to maintain good consistent tension across all of the stitches, but doing this project really helped bring that home. So this was my first left-handed knitting project, and the more I did it, the more skilled I became. So I would go back and forth between right-handed and left-handed knitting with that. But I think the reason that people say that left-handed knitting or continental knitting or picking can be faster than the right-handed is that with the right-handed knitting, you have basically 4 steps. You put the needle in, you wrap the yarn around, you pull the loop through, and you pull the stitch off. With the picking, the left-handed, you're holding the working yarn in your left hand, you insert the needle, and you pick or just grab that working yarn and pull it through all in one step. And if you're really skilled, you can get this 3-step process: insert, pull through, off, in almost a single fluid motion, which is really satisfying. So the more you practice with it, the more skilled you become with it. This is how people are able to knit really, really, really fast. If you ever watch any speed knitting, they're usually using, not always, but usually they're using a left-handed picking technique. And it's all about efficiency of motion. So every extraneous motion of the hands is removed, and you basically are just barely moving, just enough to grab that yarn and pull it through, rather than this having to drop the needle, wrap the yarn around, and pull it off. So this is why left-handed knitting picking technique can be faster than the throwing technique, but it isn't always, and it depends on how much you've practiced and how much skill you've developed. So having said all that, you might expect that I always knit with my left hand now, and that is mostly true. I do tend to knit left-handed in the picking style most of the time, but not always. And I'm going to share with you a tale of two projects that I actually have on the needles right now. One that I'm knitting in the left-handed technique and one that I'm knitting in the right-handed technique. The first one is the Dueling Skeins scarf pattern by Loretta McCullough. I first saw this pattern on a YouTube video by Gigi, of Gigi Made It, and it is a very simple, wide stockinette scarf. So knit plain on one side, purl plain on the other, knit back and forth on straight needles, but it has a couple of really nice little details. So it has a few stitches of knit one, purl one ribbing on the both sides, and a border of knit one, purl one ribbing at either end. It's called Dueling Skeins because you have two skeins of yarn that are essentially in the same color but are different yarn bases. I chose this first one. Both of these are from the yarn shop called Lavande Biscotte in Montreal that I got when I was there on a trip. And that is a cute little hand dyeing knitting yarn shop that I definitely recommend you go check out. I'll put the link to their web store in the description so that you can do that. But the first was called Fizwizbiz. So it is, they're both lavender, and this one has a little bit of merino sparkle, stellina sparkle in a merino yarn. And then you knit with one of the skeins, and then about at the neck in the middle, you switch to the other one. And I have switched right here. You can see this is the new skein, and it is called La Douce MCN, which stands for the Sweet Merino Cashmere Nylon. So they're both fingering weight yarn, getting about the same stitch count, about the same tension. And you have a very subtle difference, so there's no sparkle in this side. When you wear the scarf, you have one side that is slightly different than the other. So there's lots of choices that you can make with this pattern. It's very simple to knit, very quick to knit. And I am knitting this in my left-handed technique. So I hold the yarn. I hold the working yarn with my left hand. My right needle that is going to be accepting the new stitches goes in, I pick the yarn up and pull it through and pull it off. This is really great for the ribbing section because I don't have to, the motion to change from the working yarn in the back and the working yarn in the front is very small. So for this ribbing section, now I'm going to do a purl stitch, a knit stitch, a purl stitch, a knit stitch, a purl stitch, and a knit stitch. And then I'm off to the just knit across. I do find that I have to make sure that my tension is even between the knitting and the purling. It is quite a bit more even than when I hold with my right hand. However, my knit stitches tend to be tighter than my purl stitches, so I have to intentionally loosen up when I'm doing the knit stitches and make sure that I'm not putting too much tension on those stitches as I knit. But as you can see, it's very small movements with my hands, and each stitch is very quick it's almost a 1-2 motion the way that I do it. I haven't quite mastered the single motion, single fluid motion for each of the stitches. But that's how I typically do a left-handed knitting. And this is how I do knit most of the time. So that's my picking technique. But there are some projects that I do prefer to use my right-handed technique. This may be because this is what I learned with, but I do feel like I have a little bit more control. And so if there's a very tricky knitting that I'm doing, or if I have a yarn that tends to split, I might go back to using my right hand. One of those that I almost always do right-handed is socks. I do my socks 2 at a time, toe up, usually on the long circular needle, unless the pattern is really complicated, or if I'm using multiple different colors of yarn or balls of yarn, it becomes difficult to manage that. But with 2 at a time, I have 2 balls of yarn, so it's not too difficult to manage. But for a sock, I want to have a nice dense fabric, so I want to pull the tension quite tightly. My left-handed technique tends to be a little bit looser and drapier, so that's what I use mostly for that. But for socks, I want to use my right hand. I also find that right-handed knitting for this sock at the join between the different needles, using my right hand, I'm able to give the extra tension when I need to. I learned a great technique from the YouTuber Earthtones Girl. If you haven't followed her, you definitely should. She's all about socks and is a great teacher. She had a great tip for how to make that join seamless, to not have the ladders at the side or the looseness. And that was to not worry about the tension so much in the first stitch, but on the second and third stitches, give a little extra tug and that will tighten up your stitches. And it works great. It works great. So again, I'll link to them in the description so that you can go and follow Earthtones Girl. These socks I'm knitting in this beautiful Corriedale and Merino yarn that was beautifully hand dyed by CJ Koho Designs and Carla, who is the designer. I bought this at a yarn festival, and she was one of the first people to really encourage me to just go out there and write my own knitting patterns if I was interested in that. So thank you, Carla, for that. For that push. I really appreciated that. But this yarn is called Myrtille. The color is called Myrtille, and it's this lovely blue variegated sort of blue-gray color, and I think it's just going to be really nice. So again, just basic stockinette, but for these, let me get my needles set up. So I have my working needle on the front of my my socks, and then I'm holding the yarn or the needle and the working yarn in my right hand. So I pull up the 2 sides, wrap that yarn around. I'm not going to worry about the tension there. In the next stitch, I'm going to give it a tug, wrap the yarn around, and go. And as you can see, each stitch is possibly a little bit slower. The nice thing about doing the right-handed knitting, I find, is that I can feel it and I don't have to look at what I'm doing, because I'm feeling where the stitches are a lot more and where the needles are. And so it's great to do sock knitting or simple right-handed knitting during conversations when I'm talking with other people, or having at a social event and I want to do my knitting. I can still participate in conversations without being too distracted by, whoops, I split the yarn, or I missed the stitch, or I dropped the stitch, and then I have to go back and fix it in the middle of conversation. So, like I said, I do both right-handed and left-handed knitting, but I don't really just switch between them willy-nilly. I kind of pick one that I'm going to use for the project, and then stick with that through the entire project. And that's because I find that my right-handed and my left-handed tension are different. So if I were to switch between them in the middle of the project, you would definitely be able to see where the tension is different from one to the next. So that's my my take on right-handed and left-handed knitting. So let's go do some more knitting. That's it for this video. So what about you? Do you use your right hand or your left hand when you're knitting? Do you use both? Why and when do you choose? Let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for spending some of your creative time with me. I hope to see you in the next one. Bye!